This is the second part of Darren's backstory. Sweat shook free from Darren's face as he landed on the side of the building and took off in a sprint. He reached the far side of the building and threw himself off the edge, cresting over the street to land on the building on the far side. And he tumbled for a bit because he lost his balance, but he got back on his feet and ran up the side of the building, making his way to the top of the city as fast as he could. Green lights passed on both sides of him, and this building cut out short, but the next one reached taller, so he turned to the side and ran toward the side of the next building, throwing himself off and passing over one of the capsule tubes. Just as a capsule passed by, he tucked and rolled on the side of the next building so he could slow down and change direction to keep heading straight up. And it caught the eye of a Profithian man sitting out on a patio, surprised to see Darren. If he weren't wearing his Palas Manaya uniform, he'd get in a whole lot more trouble than he would. As it was, this close to the top of the city was mostly the housing of richer Profithians, and they were not used to people being out on the sides of the buildings, just because it wasn't the safest. As a Palas Manaya, though, Darren did a lot of things that most Profithians or humans wouldn't do. He got up to the top of the city and glanced around, noticed Mauritius making his way up through the city as well. The path that he'd taken must have been slower because he was behind Darren, but with those legs he was gaining ground. He could still run faster than Darren ever could. Maybe one day that would change, but Mauritius was catching up as Darren forced his way up to the top of the building, and he dropped himself over the edge and felt gravity reorient back to normal. And he let himself tumble and pull himself up back to running, making his way to the walkway that would lead him up to Menosakise, the monument atop the city. And he ran up onto the walkway, which curved its way upward and spiraled in the air as it made its way up to the monument. And he ran, keeping an eye on Mauritius, who was ahead of him by this point, and Darren was still falling behind. He would not get to the top first, unless he did something. And as he ran, he reached into his pocket universe and felt for a moment before pulling out his a grappling gun and aiming it toward the top of the monument, which he could see over the lip of the platform that it stood on. He aimed his harpoon gun or his grappling gun and shot out, throwing himself off the walkway as he did. It was unnecessary, but it felt really cool, and he could land safe, even if he did fall. But he wouldn't get there first if he didn't get this anyway. But the grappling hook wrapped itself around the monument, and he immediately engaged the winch, and it shot him forward, pulling himself up. And he swung kind of underneath the lip of the platform and came back up. Just as he got over the lip, he disengaged the winch, and as he was still coming up in the air, he unlocked the harpoon from the gun and shook it free and re-engaged the winch so it slammed shut as he approached the ground. He fell a few extra feet, but again, he was able to manage it, and he landed and rolled and was up on his feet by the time that Mauritius got up onto the platform. And he was gasping about as much as Darren was, but he beat him. And they both looked to Chuck and saw Ceridian standing by his side. Of course, Ceridian beat the both of them. That official son, he made sense that he would beat them yet again. They both approached, and Darren said, "Well, at least I got you, Mauritius." And Mauritius said, "Yeah, because you pulled something out of your sleeve." Darren said, "I've always got something up my sleeve." Mauritius said, "The one time you don't, I'll beat you when it's just you and me." And he said, "But Ceridian got the both of us today." And Ceridian shrugged, "I know the city." And Chuck laughed to see the three of them go back and forth. He said, "You've all done very well. You're all growing, and it's wonderful to see. I'm glad you're in the ranks of the Palas Manaya. So that's your training for today. Feel free to go and take a rest, and you've got duties in the evening." And they thanked him. Ceridian threw himself off the edge of the platform and disappeared into the city. And Mauritius nodded to Darren and reached out for his traveler and traveled back to Decision. And Darren turned to Chuck and he said, "What are you up to for the rest of the day?" And Chuck said, "Not much. You can join me if you'd like. I'll just be doing some cleaning and looking for some real estate." And Darren said, "Real estate? Your quarters are in the center of the city. Where would you go? Are you going on a mission or something?" And Chuck said, "You could say that." He said, "We've talked about this, Darren. The time's come for me to retire." And Darren said, "Well, but you can't go. What'll we do without you?" And Chuck said, "You'll do exactly what I've trained you to do. You knew this was coming. I'm getting old, Darren. I've earned my retirement. You're not going to take this from me." But Darren just couldn't imagine not having Chuck there because he'd been there every step of the way, and Chuck always knew what to do. Chuck punched in a few numbers in the capsule station, and the capsule popped open. Darren and Chuck stepped in, and they went on their way. And Darren said, "We're gonna miss you." And Chuck said, "Well, hopefully not. I'll still be around. You'll be able to reach out to me if you need anything." And the capsule pulled up just inside the village. Darren stepped out again, remembering the first time he stepped out of the capsule, and everything had seemed so foreign. Now it was home, and he actually felt more a part of things here than he ever had back on Earth. And I said, "Wait, why are we at the village?" And Chuck said, "Like I said, I'm not going to be far. I can never stop working. I figure I'll get a place at the village, keep an eye on things here, but I won't be nearly as active as I have been. But I can come to counsel you and chat with the leaders of the Profithians if they need help or anything. And I can keep a closer eye on Furisamaya Fotheeva from down here. Keep watch over him." And Darren nodded. It was odd that he'd put himself in the village quarters. Not that they were bad, they took good care of the people in the village, but it was kind of odd that he'd put himself here. And Chuck said, I'll be closer to some of our own kind. And he nodded to a slender, raven-haired girl that passed. Darren caught her eyes. They passed and looked away. And Chuck said, "Who knows? Maybe you could use being closer to other humans too, now that I'm gone especially." And Darren said, "No." He said, "Chuck, you're the one that's all business. Why are you trying to distract me now? Falera and I can't work out. I'm her captor. It just won't work out." And Chuck shrugged. He said, "Yeah, well, if you insist." He said, "Oh, by the way, the missions are yours now, but I just noticed on the instruments today they've picked up a possible seer traveler mix back on Earth." And Darren said, "Well, we haven't had one of those in years." I said, what are we going to do about it?" And Chuck said, "That's up to you." That gave Darren leave. Now it was his decision on what to do with things. He felt bad. The instruments usually picked up things in younger children, and he hated to cut a kid's life short just because he could possibly cause danger. Though they definitely needed to keep an eye on him and prevent him from causing trouble. He said, maybe I'll find some real estate of my own." And Chuck said, what do you mean by that?" said, I might move back to Earth, have some semblance of a normal life, and keep my distance from the village, which romance had never worked out for him, and he didn't want to have to think about it. The further he could be from Falere, the better. And he said, plus, then the kid could have a normal life. I'd just keep him from traveling and be able to keep an eye on him. And Shek said, well, you could make that work. It'd be harder, but you could make it work. And Darren liked the sound of it. He missed Earth. He hadn't spent a lot of time there in the last few years. But that could be nice. He said, what's the kid's name? And Chuck thought for a minute. He said, Reggie. Reggie Ballast.